And once again, as we found the drum, the kick, and the snare.
of August, and yeah, we are recording with my friend Joe Lindsley.
Here in Ukraine, Yosef Yosipovich.
Yuzek.
Or Yuzik. Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, can you introduce yourself? Tell about like who you are.
I'm Joe. I'm an American. I've been to Ukraine several times the past few years, but the last day of February 2020, I flew from Stockholm to Lviv to speak at a conference at a university here, the Catholic University. And I plan to be here for 2 weeks. And I'm still here. I haven't left for 1 minute, 1 hour. I haven't left at all. And during those 2 weeks, the borders closed for the pandemic. And there was like one emergency escape flight offered for American citizens. And everyone in America was like, oh, you're in Ukraine, you're going to die. Because all they knew about Ukraine was, this happens every time, by the way, I'm recording here. All they knew about Ukraine was Chernobyl. Because every travel show that ever comes to Ukraine, they come to Ukraine, whether it's American or British show, usually in November, after the leaves have fallen and before the snow arrives, so it looks like a nuclear wasteland.
Best time in Chernobyl.
Exactly, yeah.
And so, this sound, it also like expresses idea of something like nuclear radiation is already here.
Yeah, exactly. But it's simply, everything's fine right now. We're okay. But I already knew Ukraine to be a very amazingly free country, especially since the spirit of Euromaidan, of your 2014 revolution, has inspired me for a long time. And everything I knew about the Ukrainian people, I thought that in the pandemic, this would be one of the freest countries in the world. And I was right. And because Ukrainians will do as they wish. And they will live as they wish. And no one in this country went 2 years without seeing their grandmother. Or that never happened there. You can't do that. The government knew you could not lock Ukrainians in their houses because you would have another revolution. So I decided to stay here. And I was working with a journalist I had met. I used to work at, for the chairman of Fox News. Crazy, bizarre life that I was actually trying to run away from. I was trying to get away from all that political stuff. And then now Lviv is like, today we have the United Nations motorcade here, and the whole world came here. And for 2 years during the pandemic, I was free from that stuff.
Sorry. Микола, а є який шанс, що ми цю херню виключимо? Ні? Okay.
When I was live on the radio here, it's the same thing. And on the radio, they're like, are you getting shot at? And if I was a normal reporter, I'd be like, yeah, we don't know.
Yeah. Nuclear radiation alarm.
Yeah.
Typical.
It's like when the reporters put the bulletproof vest on for the camera or the mask, and then you go to the bar without it. Yeah, I love those people.
Gosh, did you hear this story about BBC? When Russians junkies were bombing Lviv, they put online translation stream. Did you hear this story? It's nice one. Usually these people named people who correct artillery, right? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like you have those junkies, they have some coordinates trying to bomb. They are, I don't know, 100 meters away from the target. And there is a person on the area which just sends a message like 200 meters to the north, for example. And this person just corrects the fire. Mm-hmm. And it's bad. We're trying, our like special forces trying to stop this type of activity. And guys from BBC, they just put their camera like on the target and they were streaming this bombing process. And I mean, what if, what's going on here?
Giving, look, I remember in the early days of the war, when there were many foreign reporters here in Lviv, I got to know a lot of them, mainly because alcohol was illegal in Lviv during that time, but journalists need alcohol. And because I lived here for 2 years, it was locals could always find what they needed to, survive. And it's the reason why they made that law was because there were so many strangers here. We had so many spies. We had all, and but anyway, I got to know a lot of the reporters because I could help them, and they would complain to me. Reporters, when they're not writing stories, are almost as conspiratorial as the most crazy conspiracy theorist, because they're inquisitive people. They listen, they ask questions. They never would show that to the public.
Okay.
And so the case of I remember that now. That was the first time I think that Lviv was hit in the city limits. It was. And there was smoke everywhere, and CNN and the BBC were showing live. This war, there's so many things that are very new about it. Like it's the first war very documented on social media.
I agree.
You didn't have this, in Afghanistan, say, and this is a great thing in a way, because I think if this war was not documented on social media, your average person in France or the UK or California would just see it as some complicated, distant conflict. Well, and I think without this, because I think in so many countries, the first 3 days of the war, especially, most of the Western capitals were silent. I think they were waiting to see. Okay, they were kind of hoping Ukraine would lose quickly and they wouldn't have to deal with this problem. The defense companies were hoping something different, maybe, but it was the people who were following along the war on social media, on Telegram channels, and they were able to see what was actually happening. So you couldn't lie to the people around the world. Without that, I'm pretty sure that Americans would say, Ukraine, Russia, it sounds, is this Africa? What, some far distant conflict, and they would have no emotional connection to it. So it is because of the social media. And now the downside of that is, and I think the first month of it, everyone was trying to figure this out, right? So you need to share what's happening here, but you have to share it in the right way so that it's not helping the Russians, correct their strikes. And this was a difficult challenge, and it was difficult for Ukrainian journalists, for Ukrainian government also to figure out. It was very limited access they gave the media at the beginning, because they weren't sitting there wondering about the media. They were saying, Kyiv could fall in days. It was very existential, and the media, I didn't see that urgency because they hadn't been here before. They didn't really feel this threat. And there was a book by the famous British author Evelyn Waugh, and he wrote a book called Scoop, maybe in the 1940s or 50s. And my first job in journalism was an internship at U.S. News Magazine in Washington. And my boss was a famous political columnist, Michael Barone, and on my desk was a copy of this book, Scoop, by Evelyn Waugh. And he said, it's a novel, but he said, and then he wrote a note, this is the truest book about journalism. And it's about British journalists in the, 1940s or 50s, traveling to war in a fake African country. And everything that I remember from that book is exactly what I saw when I was in the cafes of Lviv, like at Fatset or the Bank Hotel where all the journalists went because the bar was always open there. And the way they, write stuff without actually having investigated things. There are many great journalists, but I'll just say that book holds true today. Everything I've seen here in the war, Russia's war on Ukraine. And I see this when I read stories. I mean, people, they know so little of Ukrainian culture, language, everything that Ukrainians built these past 8 years is not shown.
Sorry, you are talking, I think what you are talking, it's not too much, but it's extra professional work. What I think we can expect from journalists from different part of world, it's just professionalism, and professionalism. One thing, for example, my friends, they are fighting now, and some guys, I think they were from UK, I'm not sure about this, but it's like foreign journalists from some famous channel, it's not like random people from students magazine. And they were recording interview with my friend, and he asked them to blur background, because background can be used to correct the strikes. And they said, yes, sure, of course. They didn't do it. And after, I think, 2 or 3 days, they were bombed by Russians, and few guys were killed at that situation. And since that moment, my friend, he doesn't like journalists at all. He was responsible for that people who were killed. And this story, I mean, I'm not professional journalist, but isn't it like just an common sense to do this stuff? To like, they don't know Ukrainian culture. I am okay with that, but what about this type of like actions?
It's a good point. I mean, I think both of these things are actually, especially in the long run, very important because everything I know about Ukraine is like, it's not a helpless country. You know, Ukraine is, I think, one of the freest countries in the world since I know it is, since the Euromaidan revolution. I want that story to be told. It has to be told. Putin, it's like, look at the way he's attacked the city of Kharkiv from the very first moments of the war up until this morning. That city's been hit almost every single day. It's a beautiful city. Before the war, a beautiful city, a Russian-speaking city. I was there in January and February. I went for 3 days. I stayed for 3 weeks, which I tend to do in places, but also because I loved it. And it was one of the most entrepreneurial cities. I had the best falafel I've ever had in my life there, better than in Israel. And when I spoke with people of Kharkiv, they sounded to me like what Americans used to sound like. They would say, here's my dream, and I know if I work hard, I can get there. And incredible optimism. And there's no city in Russia like that, I think. I know, I can say that with confidence. Few cities in the world like that. And it's a Russian-speaking city. And that's why I think Putin he wants to erase its memory. And that's why I think it's very important for the world to hear what Ukraine, what Mariupol was. Mariupol's gone now. But it was a beautiful, cool place these past 8 years. I mean, they had 8 years of freedom and they used it well. And it's very important the world sees that because the world still thinks of Ukraine as, well, it was Chernobyl since 86 and now the horrible war. And
what about Klitschko brothers?
And the Klitschko brothers and maybe Borscht and but it's very limited. And at the same time, the journalists who endanger. I mean, this is, and I think, especially in the first months of the war, everyone was figuring this out. You have to somehow share the reality of what's happening, but you have to do it in a way that so you don't give the enemy too much information. This is very difficult, and I think the Ukrainian government has actually done a pretty amazing job of pulling this off. Look what happened in Crimea the past 2 Tuesdays. There was some activity, right? The Saki, the Russian base in Crimea, which they've occupied since 2014, was hit. The Russians would rather admit like their own absolute stupidity than say Ukraine succeeded. So they said, "Oh, someone was smoking, and we lost dozens of planes." Well done, Molodets.
Sorry, but for one of these places, they say that they recognized style of UK special forces. UK.
Really?
UK. I mean, it's not, of course, statement. Their words don't cost a lot, but the idea was that they recognized it's like when it's not your person was smoking there, it's definitely some super special forces from Mi-6. Maybe it was James Bond style.
Yeah.
We recognized it.
Yeah.
Old friend.
And the Ukrainian government has been very coy about both of the last 2 Tuesdays and what happened in Crimea. I mean, they were not, and part of it because it seems that some American officials have been discouraging Ukraine from attacking Crimea. They're afraid of escalation. But I think a lot of people in Ukraine say escalation means quicker victory. Yes, please.
Yeah, we don't like scary about escalation. It won't be worst for us. It's a war. I mean, what type of escalation? Nuclear war, maybe, but scary. It's not the way to win the fight.
It's like if you have cancer and you get chemotherapy, is an escalation, right? You lose your hair, but come on, you gotta.
That's true.
So this has been.
It's a fight, and you should be as tough as you can to win it. It's not escalation. It's not bad, as you said. So,
well, and this is one of the, everyone here wants to win, and it's existential. And I think, like we started the first hours of the war, Ukrainian Freedom News, a Telegram channel. That's how it started. It was a group of friends. Most of them were musicians and bartenders, people I trusted the most in Lviv. So there was a lot of Russian operatives, I think, going around. And we started this Telegram channel to share the news, but then people started to send us money in the first hours of the war. And then we realized there's a need for helmets and bulletproof vests, especially IFAKs, the military grade first aid kits. And we knew who needed these things. And so we became sort of activist journalists and with no apology for that. We're not going to, we're only reporting on the story, we can't help. No, because we believe in this idea of freedom and that we're unashamed about that. And I think we saw a lot of that in especially in the early media coverage of the war. In fact, I've been in the mountains for the past month, needing to find some strength there. And for the first time, I went back and I watched like CNN and BBC reports of the first days and weeks of the war. We didn't have time to watch it here. We were making Molotov cocktails because we thought there would be Russian tanks coming down the streets of Lviv. And I was so happy when I came back here yesterday to see Russian tanks in Lviv destroyed, burned out in front of the city hall on display. But everyone that was here, if you didn't leave, you were prepared mentally to fight.
We were preparing. We are making weapon against them as well.
We imagined they would be at our door in a matter of days. I mean, it really felt that way, and it was a real possibility.
It's interesting how many people have some protection against tanks and different stuff in their civil life.
What was for you the first, say, 24 hours of the war? What was it like? What was the situation? What were the emotions?
It was easy, to be honest. I think it's internal feeling which always causes me to move against big wave, and that point of time big wave was chaos and fear. So just that I feared a lot of chaos and fear around, and I thought it's time to be organized and brave, I think, just to go against that not efficient feelings. And I mean, there were a lot of work, a lot of preparation, a lot of activities. So small amount of sleep, but a lot of activity.
I forgot about that, man. There was no, and as I was watching these, like last week, I'm watching the CNN reports of the first days of the war. It's like watching a movie that you were in. And it was very emotional to watch that. Very difficult in a way. And for the first time, I was really seeing what the world was seeing about the life we were living here. And it was complete adrenaline, I think, for 2 months at least. I mean, 2 months of maybe just 3 hours of sleep a night often. And that adrenaline carried us through. And then we got to the next phase where we're kind of still in this phase now where you don't have the adrenaline. So all the other psychological factors come in. I think so many people I know, they don't cry, but the tears are just around the corner. Like a couple more wards, and they would, because now you have to, how long is this going to go on? What are we really facing? How do you plan for the future? I had a friend who his wife and kids were in Germany since the beginning of the war, and they just came back. And when we were talking about this, and he was telling me this, and he was about to cry because he was thinking they came back, but we don't. It's not really safe now, and we don't know. And so now we're in this existential crisis phase of the war, where we have some time to think. And this is where we really have to figure out how to be strong. And most of my conversations lately with friends are about this. How do we keep ourselves mentally fit for this and spiritually fit? And but those first hours, a friend I was talking to said he was Wednesday, February 23rd. I was at the jazz club in Lviv. The son of Ella Fitzgerald was singing. He lives in Ukraine. I know so many black musicians from America who live in Ukraine because they felt free here. And so many of them told me they connected with Ukrainians. Ukrainians were slaves for centuries, like African Americans in the U.S. And so Ella Fitzgerald's son is singing. I'm at the LV Cafe Jazz Club. And then my friend was in Kyiv, and he was drinking with his best friend till 3:30 in the morning. And some people thought the war was coming, but most people, I felt it was coming. most people said, it was hard to believe. So 3:30, and he goes to sleep for like 40 minutes, and then the first, you're awakened by the shelling of Kyiv, and he said instantly. I mean, he'd been pretty drunk. He said instantly all the alcohol was gone, the adrenaline took over. He grabbed his wife and kid, and they started driving, and they drove north to Irpin. And then, but he was getting reports that Irpin is, the Russians are moving in that direction. So then he's driving another direction. He said he drove 17 hours, no coffee, no food, and had been drinking significantly the night before, but all that was gone. The adrenaline took over completely, and that's the type of threat we face. And we were living in like Lord of the Rings, and that's why we call the Russians the orcs. I mean, it was such a surreal moment. And that adrenaline didn't go away for months. Coronavirus. Do you remember January here? People were still. I mean, Ukraine was a pretty free country during the pandemic. Like, we could tell stories about that. But in January, there was a mild lockdown here, and I knew a lot of people that had coronavirus a little bit. And has anyone worn a mask? Like, we replaced mask with bulletproof vests. A little more expensive. And no one has worn a mask since those early hours of February 24th. I don't know anyone in Ukraine who's had coronavirus. I know Ukrainians who've gone abroad who've got it. And all of that went away. And maybe the adrenaline is part of this.
Yeah, with coronavirus is very interesting that like to win coronavirus you just need war in your country, and the priorities, first things first. And yes, and I think here that statistics with coronavirus disease is not so bad here. So even without mask, without gloves, with shelting.
Soldiers lying in the trenches together in the cold winter and in the bomb shelter.
There were a lot of cases where people were close. It makes society closer. Underground stations, there were hundreds of people sitting together.
No corona.
No corona. Maybe it wasn't so bad. Anyway, about Russian agents, you say that there are a lot of them. Isn't just it paranoia from your side?
I could be accused of paranoia sometimes.
But
I escaped my job in New York in a car chase through the Hudson Valley from the most powerful media empire in the world, the empire of Rupert Murdoch. Maybe my paranoia is justified. But no, since last October, I started to get reports from friends in America, Washington, especially, that there were many Russian operatives in Lviv. Watch out. And my regular places like the Cafe Fatset, which I can say because they clearly already know. There would be these beautiful Russian-speaking girls there, and they never were there before. And so there were a lot of strange people in the months before the war, and then even some people I got to know, and then I began to realize, I think the Kremlin thought, and this is a whole other discussion for another time, but they did think that Ukraine would fall pretty quickly. They had backup plans. I think they were prepared for the contingencies. I don't think they were stupid about it. But they thought, and everyone here thought, and if it were not for that immediate bravery of the Ukrainians, this would have been true, that even Lviv, which Putin hates because it's the center of Ukrainian culture, it's the center, really it is, and you could tell in his speeches he hates it, that Lviv would fall into Russian hands. And I think it was almost like a zombie apocalypse. Like, there were Russian agents everywhere, and they were waiting for the moment where they could rip off their mask, and then they'd be ready to take over the city. And we had plenty of reports from British and American intelligence that they had hit lists of the people they wanted to kill, the people who were most effective, who would be the resistance leaders. So they were, but they were taken care of. And now in Lviv, very few. They have only the very best ones, I guess, would still be left. But they were rounded up. And usually the air alarms in the beginning of the war, I think in Lviv, it was not often the threat from the air, but it was on the streets. And they were working to get rid of the Russian agents on the streets, about which I have more stories, but I don't know how much time we have. So
I think it's interesting to hear your stories with Russians and your experience with that type of shit. If you don't mind, of course.
Well, from before the war? Yeah, and then maybe we'll leave it at that and talk about some other stuff later. Before the war, long before it, I had just escaped my job in New York City, working for the most powerful media empire, blah blah blah, news corporation.
You like to say this about media empire, most
Well,
powerful.
it is, yeah. And they made, by the way, UkrainianFreedomNews.com if you want to follow. I mean, but Hollywood made a TV show about some of this stuff, The Loudest Voice, but some of it's true. It's Hollywood. But anyway,
Why are Russians in this story?
so I had just escaped New York, so a little bit paranoid. And I was living in Philadelphia, and I was invited on a free trip to Moscow at St. Petersburg. And for journalists, it's pretty normal to have. It's pretty normal. Journalists, they love free junkets with lots of
Everybody
alcohol.
likes free stuff.
Everyone, yeah, and journalists don't get paid much, but so you take advantage of these free trips. And I said, sure. And then I look at the itinerary for the trip, and the nicest hotels in Moscow, caviar every 2 minutes or whatever. But then it had like strange programming, like learn how the parliament works, and it sounded something weird about it. And the trip coincided with a Notre Dame football game, like American football, that I really wanted to go to, my alma mater, my university in the States. And so I hadn't yet agreed to go on this trip. And there was this woman named Anastasia who I was communicating with, this Russian woman. And she was mad at me that I didn't just agree to it right away. And then a few days later, my sister, who's still living at home with my parents, she called me and she said, Joe, what the hell have you done to our family now? There've been other things before. And I said, what do you mean? She said, the FBI surrounded our house this morning. And agents had surrounded the house, and they went up. They were pretending to be the police. My mom thought they were Jehovah's Witnesses, which scares her more than anything. The people trying to proselytize, they're lovely people, but they try to convert you at their door. And so she was hiding in the hallway and telling my sister upstairs, like, don't look out the window. And she thought they were just door-to-door, religious proselytizers, but it was the FBI. So finally, my mom, with some neighbors, goes outside and says, and they're like, oh, we're the FBI. And my mom's like, you said you were the police. You're impersonating cops, violating the Constitution. Get off my property. And they're like, hey, lady, we're just looking for your son. And she's like, oh, he's in Philadelphia. Here's his information. And then the FBI calls me after I get off the phone with my sister. I'm very angry now that the FBI would do this to my family. And they call me, and they're like, this is the FBI. And they're like, well, Philadelphia office. I said, yeah. I said, your colleagues in North Carolina scared the shit out of my family this morning. They go, oh, we're so sorry. But we want to meet you. And there was a coffee shop right underneath my apartment. It's some stupid name. But there was another coffee shop 3 blocks away called Mugshots. Like, mugshot when you get arrested. You get and also coffee mug, like a pun. And because this is right across from an old prison that's now a museum in Philly. And so I said, it's the FBI. I'm like, meet me in Mugshots. And they're like, what? I'm like, it's a coffee shop. And it's very important detail. It's an extremely cold day. Like it was an unusually cold day in October, but cold day in Philadelphia. And so I'm walking to the coffee.
2019, right?
No, it was 2014 or 15.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I think it was, I'll have to check that, man. But I think it was, no, it was before Euromaidan.
2013.
But it was right when Euromaidan was starting.
2013.
2013.
Nice.
Yeah. And when Euromaidan began, like right in October. And interesting. And as I'm walking to the coffee shop, I text a friend who's a Philadelphia cop. And I said, I can't really tell you what's happening, but can you send a couple police cruisers to Mugshots? I don't think I told him it was the FBI. We're going to have like a Waco incident in Center City, Philly. It would have been crazy. But anyway, and then, but I was a little bit nervous about this. I don't know what it was. And I thought I was maybe being framed by Rupert Murdoch's people or something. And so I go into this coffee shop. FBI agents come in, and it's a hipster coffee shop, and they look like FBI agents coming in. They're black trench coats, and I'm like, "You sure you want to talk here?" And they're like, "Yeah, it's fine." And as they're telling me this information, like all the earbuds of everyone around fall out. People are listening, like, "What the hell is this?" And they told me that there was this Russian cultural organization that had organized these trips for like 15 years, and they brought many Americans to Moscow, and they would get them like drunk and get them compromised so they had dirt on them, or they get them to spill information, and some of them they would try to make into Russian agents, and the FBI had been watching them for a while, and then finally they had pounced, and the head of this organization worked for the Russian FSB. He escaped in time. He made it back to Russia, but they caught some of the people, and I said. But the cops, like the FBI guys, were like they were trying to see like if I was, had affinity for these people. And I was still angry that they like scared my family that morning. And so there's good cop and bad cop, and the good cop was like, "Doesn't this piss you off that the Russians would do this?" I said, "No." I said, "We spy, they spy. Like I understand, but I said it pisses me off how you scared my family this morning. That angers me as a free American." And so then they were writing notes down like this guy can't be trusted. And I had previously worked with Velvet Revolutionaries from the Czech Republic who were anti-communist, but these guys were not smart enough to realize that. And they're like, "You were working with revolutionaries in Czech Republic?" I'm like, "Oh, jeez, yeah." And anyway, they said I could go if I wanted to. They said, like, "Would you like to spy for us?" And anyway, I decided I'm going to the Notre Dame football game instead, and I won't do this. And then so the agents left, and meanwhile, there was a Philadelphia police cruiser outside. One of my friends had showed up. No shootout with the FBI, fortunately. And my police friends are sort of gossips, and had called a bunch of our other friends in the neighborhood. This is the weirdest part of it is, so it was a Ukrainian neighborhood of Philadelphia. And there was this, this is so bizarre. There was a Ukrainian-American, this is the Ukrainian-American Irish gypsy folk rock band, which I would later become their manager. And so there was two Ukrainian brothers. Their parents came from Lviv. They were born in America. And that were part of this band. And they were in our group of friends in Philadelphia. And so I'm on the street, out in the cold, talking with some of the friends that have showed up and the cops, telling them about this FBI stuff. And then I see my friend, this Ukrainian-American, walking up the street, and he's wearing a Soviet general's coat. I'm like, I really feel that I'm being framed. There's just some, and no one knew about the Russia trip or anything. And so my friend comes up to me, and I said, "What the hell are you wearing, man?" He's like, "Oh, my sister, she was back in Ukraine. She found this at a thrift shop." I said, he's like, "I never could wear it, but it's so cold today." I'm like, I could get away with it today. I'm like, the FBI just met with me, said that Russia was trying to recruit me, and these agents were not the brightest guys. They were probably like, "This guy, he's meeting with General Trotsky right in the streets of Philadelphia." It was too much. I'm sure the FBI guys were watching. But anyway, yeah, I didn't go to Russia, which I'm glad, because that would make things much more difficult now. Yeah.
Not
That's
so
it.
bad. So you have reasons to believe that Russian agents are around us because you have a friend who used to wear generals wear, right? So even friends can be there, right?
Well, and this is when in this little mountain village I've been in, there's a lot of history of Ukrainian resistance throughout the centuries, going back to when the Mongols were invading 1,000 years ago. But in the 1940s and 50s, I visited yesterday a house where in the basement, the NKVD, the precursor to the FSB, tortured members of the Ukrainian resistance in the 40s and 50s. And I talked to people who have, grandfathers and great-grandfathers and grandmothers who were members of the resistance. And there were stories of betrayal. People whose close friends turned out to be working for the communists and the Russians. And then so a couple nights ago in the mountains, with a group of friends, I said, is this not still possible? I mean, did human nature change? And so is it not possible that there are people that we know today who could also be working for the enemy? Because it's happened before, time and time again.
Yeah. I think it's, they work in this way, especially deep spies.
Yeah.
What are you doing now here?
The mission, it started organically. I've been working with Ukrainian journalists for 2 years throughout the pandemic in Lviv, Tavoya Misto, your city. And then when the war started, we created Ukrainian Freedom News Telegram channel. But now we have the IT Army of Ukraine made us a website, and now we have a podcast, which we're still, we're adding features to it. But the point is to share real conversations like this that Ukrainians actually have in wartime with the world. We share news about what's happening here, and we raise money and buy supplies for soldiers and hospitals. And then by doing so, we're able to deliver things to the fronts, which also gives us access to the reality of what's happening there. And so it enhances our journalism while also helping Ukrainian victory. So that's UkrainianFreedomNews.com.
It's the name of podcast.
That's the name of our website, and there you can follow us on Telegram through the website. The podcast is called Speak Freely, Near Daily War Journal. Sometimes it's called Speak Shitty because the idea is with my Ukrainian friend Zach, we have other guests, and the idea is to help the world see the reality here. I mean, look, even, and I think, in wartime, even, there's moments like right now, we're having some wine and making a podcast, and we're not, there's no air alarm. Everything's all right in this moment. We want people to really see what it's like to live in war and to share also some of the struggles and the psychological difficulties. And, when the Zelensky, it's not Zelensky's, Olena Zelenska, the first lady of Ukraine, was on Vogue magazine, a lot of Americans like, oh, this is not war. They had time for a photo shoot. What they don't realize, for example, in World War II, Winston Churchill in December 1941 went to Washington, and he was found drunk and naked in the White House, in the stairwell in the White House. And if we'd had social media then to cover this stuff, when people say, "Oh, his nation was under dire threat,"
This man knew how to get fun from the situation in some sense.
I think so, but
he was not very young at that age.
He was probably 70s and quite a large fellow, and but it wasn't.
Hope he'll be in that situation one day. I mean, drunk, nude in Washington, without social medias,
and leading your nation. And the thing is, like, we're not robots, and I think a lot of people are like, oh, why are we giving money to Ukraine if people are able to sit and have a glass of wine? I mean, it doesn't mean it doesn't mean it means we're trying to survive. The same with that Churchill anecdote. And so that's one thing in this podcast, our Near Daily War Journal. Both immediately now, we want to keep people interested in what's happening. Because if you just read the news every day, and I think this is part of Russia's strategy, the same cities are shelled every night. So you would hear the same story.
Tolerance? You think it creates tolerance, right?
Yeah, it creates. People get sort of bored with it, but instead, like, if you know the actual drama here and the human drama and how everyone, the decisions people have to make and the conversations we have and the real unfiltered conversations, and so that's what we are working to share with the world.
But why you think people won't tire from this real conversation from Ukraine? What about real conversation from US, for example?
Because it's not as interesting. It's more interesting when you live under air alarms and constant dire existential threat. And people are still interested in Ukraine. We just have to give them more interesting stories. And that's the phase we're at now. I think of this, like, we can't just report what's happening with the front lines. We need to share the human stories. And so sometimes it's going to be funny because people can still laugh in war, and other times it's going to be quite difficult conversations to have. And we have a freedom in the sense that we don't know if we'll be around tomorrow. No one on this earth does. I mean, but war just intensifies that.
And risks are higher.
Yeah, the risks are higher, but you could still get hit by a bus in London. I mean, it's like we're all gonna die, but war just makes it more clearly part of our daily lives, right? And so, hopefully, with that, we can speak freely, more freely, and this also helps me. And so I appreciate this conversation with you. Like, as a journalist, like, you can so much more easily talk about the lives of others, like that great movie about the KGB spies in Germany. You can so more easily talk about the lives of others, but not reveal anything about yourself. But I think that some of the best journalism we can do now is actually revealing our inner struggles in this wartime, so people really understand.
Isn't it gonzo journalism?
Maybe so.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's close for both of us.
Gonzo, but with a purpose, like working for victory. Not saying
as Churchill did.
Yeah, exactly.
Victory with any price.
Yeah.
So you collected money and you used it in some efficient way, right? So you delivered some stuff in the east part of the country. Can you tell about that trip?
Yeah, we people would send us money, and then we said, okay, we know what people need. People spontaneously started to donate money. And this is
How
sort
it happened for the first time? They just ask your card.
they would just send people say, how can we donate in the first hours of the war? Created a PayPal. Now it's more formal. We work with a 501c3 nonprofit in the U.S., Ukrainian Freedom Fund, and so we get tax deductible donations. Although a lot of the support is dried up because the prices are going higher in America. I think this is, because Ukraine is so much a part of the supply chain, and this is also, I think, part of the Kremlin strategy. And so it's harder to get the support. But in those, we still do though. We recently had, I was on speaking on Chicago radio and talking about how there's a need for drones. And someone sent in, he said, what do you need? A regular donor wrote me and said, what do you guys need? I said, we need a few $1,000s to get this drone. Okay, you send it to us. I never met this guy, but he's Tom Hoffman, a great guy. He's been supporting us throughout the war. So we got the drone. I gave it to a friend at Ukrainian Catholic University, an IT guy. He made the drone more elevated it to so it could evade detection better. And then I just a couple of days ago saw the video of this drone in action. It's an incredible video. It's amazing, and you can see the Russian targets. The Russians are having smoke, and then you see the Ukrainian artillery fire going to destroy them. And then I was able to share with that donor, as we do with all of our donors, hey, here's the picture of the guys receiving the drone, but even better, here's the thing in action that you paid for. You were sitting at home in Georgia, but you're also, there's different fronts in the war. There's the information front, there's the financial front. You were part of this existential fight for victory between good and evil, and then so I sent the video to the guy, and he's like, yeah, okay, what do you need next? And this is really the type of support we've really seen throughout the world. When you can show people, hey, just give it a little bit of money, and it's gonna help people actually defeat this horrible enemy. That's our with Ukrainian Freedom News. That's been our ethos.
It sounds nice, but does support decrease with the time?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's very little now, which I understand why. And meanwhile, the army is much better supplied now. I mean, a lot of that stuff worked. We're all volunteers. Somehow we got to make money. I don't know how that's going to work. But supply front is pretty good right now. I think the key battle we're in now, outside of the actual battles on the fronts, is the information war. You had the Amnesty International report saying, criticizing Ukraine and not Russia, saying Ukraine was endangering civilians because they had soldiers in their cities.
Bullshit.
What?
Bullshit.
Yeah, it was bullshit. Yeah. And during the winter, they were living in houses. Because it was cold. And there was so much bullshit there. And then the BBC at the same time, like a few days later, had a story saying Ukrainian homes for the disabled, they're abusing disabled people. They spend all these resources. I mean, do you think this happens in Russia? But it was just weird timing on some of these reports. And the information war, people are getting bored of Ukraine. I mean, it started with the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. It was the first, but now people are very bored. But it's not because they don't care. It's because they're not getting good information and stories. And I think and then we have to be innovative here. Like conversations like this, where we're sharing, the reality of life in a war, with the uncertainty and the fear that it has, and to continue to share these stories. So that's our mission now. We help with the supplies when we can.
I think especially in the light of all this, like Chinese relationship, World War III, potentially waiting. Some people here already say that it started. It's just a matter of time when everybody will be included in that. I mean, a lot of people think about big war now in the different parts of the world. Of course, people from Mariupol, they don't just think, they feel, they felt, and knew. But I mean that, we're telling interesting reality. But I think what makes it easier that this reality is potential reality for people in different parts of the world. So not very bright times, in general. What about your trip to the east part of the Ukraine?
Well, and maybe we should make this for another podcast conversation.
You know how to make intrigue.
I think we got to say
it's a whole professional journalists know how to do it. It was nice talk, to be honest, Joe. It was interesting that you called me and said, "Let's do it."
Yeah, because I'd been gone for that, and here we are sitting actually in person here. We're at my friend Nicholas's amazing wine shop, which he opened in the pandemic very bravely. And this is one of my top 14 places to have a drink in the world. We're sitting at a big oak table here with a chessboard and some American friends and a lot of ducks.
Okay, and what is the index of this place from that 14 place?
The 14 are ranked equally. There's no. Actually, I want to publish a book one day called "The World's Best 14 and a Half Bars," because I don't
and
really.
that how will be your flat?
No, because I don't care about the number. It could be 20, it could be
Okay.
10. Yeah, but we're speaking of this amazing place, which is a sign of the creativity and the entrepreneurial spirit of the Ukrainians. Yeah, Andrew, thanks for this opportunity. And yeah, next time I'd love to talk about maybe some of the more darker stories and time in Donetsk and some of what it's like to be right there in the face of the Russians, and including I spent a lot of time in Nikopol, right across the river, the Dnieper River, from the largest nuclear plant in Europe, which is occupied by Russians. And so we can talk about these things in the future. So, Dali.
Yes, thank you for your time and discussion, and it was nice to talk with you, Joe.
Andrew, thank you very much, man. Дуже дякую. And thank you all for listening. До побачення.
Слава Україні!
Героям слава. Будьмо.
Like that.